Hey, welcome to Crime Time 911. One of the things I love about this podcast is that we get to sit together wherever you are, maybe on your commute, maybe doing chores, maybe curled up with a cup of tea, and dive into stories that matter. Stories that remind us of the fragility of life, the resilience of communities, and the importance of justice. Today, we're talking about a case that shook an entire city in British Columbia. It's the story of Marissa Shen, a 13-year-old girl from Burnaby whose life was tragically cut short in 2017. Now, before we go further, I want to set the tone. This isn't just a story about what happened, it's about who Marissa was, how her community responded, and what her case has meant in the years since. We're going to walk through the timeline together, step by step. So let's start by getting to know Marissa. Marissa was born in 2004. She was the youngest in her family, and by all accounts, she was bright, curious, and creative. She loved drawing, she loved spending time with her friends, and she was known for her gentle personality. Her family described her as someone who was thoughtful and kind, someone who had a big imagination. She was a student at Moss Crop Secondary School in Burnaby, and like many kids her age, she was just starting to explore her independence, walking to the store, hanging out with friends, and enjoying the freedom of summer vacation. When you hear her story, it's impossible not to think about the everyday routines we all take for granted. A quick walk to grab a snack, a summer evening in the park. These are the kind of moments that should be safe, ordinary, and completely uneventful. But for Marissa and her family, July 18th, 2017 became a day that changed everything. Before we get into the events of that day, let's set the scene a little bit. Burnaby is a city just east of Vancouver, part of the Greater Vancouver area. It's a diverse, vibrant community with a mix of residential neighborhoods, shopping centers, and green spaces. One of the most well-known spots in Burnaby is Central Park. And no, not the one in New York. This is Burnaby's Central Park, a huge urban park with trails, sports fields, and wooded areas. It's the kind of place where families go for picnics, joggers get their daily run, and kids ride their bikes. In the summer of 2017, Burnaby was like any other Canadian city enjoying the season. Long days, warm evenings, and a sense of ease. Parents felt comfortable letting their kids walk to the store or hang out at the park. It was a community where people felt safe. That's the part of why what happened to Marissa was so shocking. It wasn't just the loss of a young life. It was the disruption of that sense of safety. That Tuesday evening began like so many others in Burnaby. Around 6 p.m., Marissa left her home telling her family she was heading to a nearby Tim Hortons. It was a short walk, something she'd done before. Nothing about it seemed unusual. She was captured on surveillance cameras near the restaurant buying a snack. After that, her movements became less clear. Later, the RCMP released a short video clip showing her walking near Central Park, close to where she would eventually be found. When Marissa didn't return home at the expected time, her family grew uneasy. At first, they may have thought she was delayed. Maybe she ran into a friend or lingered outside. But as the evening stretched on, their concern deepened. By later that night, her family reported her missing. The RCMP responded quickly, recognizing that she was only 13 and that time was critical. Police began retracing her steps, checking surveillance footage from nearby businesses and canvassing the neighborhood. They also used her phone's GPS signal to help narrow down her location. Family members and neighbors joined in, calling her name and checking familiar spots. The atmosphere was tense. Every minute felt longer than the last. In the early hours of July 19, 2017, roughly 7 hours after she was last seen, police traced her phone to Central Park. That's where they found her. The RCMP had held a press conference soon after, confirming that her case was being treated as suspicious and, importantly, that it appeared to be a random act. That phrase unsettled the community. It meant there wasn't an obvious explanation, no clear connection, and that uncertainty rattled Burnaby. By the next day, word had spread across the city. Parents were shaken. Joggers who had always felt safe in Central Park suddenly avoided it. Families who had let their kids walk to the store alone now insisted on going with them. At the same time, people came together. Vigils were organized. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes appeared at the park. Her brother later shared, quote, "She was one of those people who had earphones in, loud music while she was walking," end quote. That small detail makes her feel so real. Just a teenager enjoying her summer, doing something so ordinary. Now, I personally tell my children to always keep at least one earbud out so that they can hear what's going on around them, because walking around and not being able to hear the outside world around you makes it easier for predators to grab you. After Marissa was found in Central Park in the early hours of July 19, 2017, the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, or IHIT, took over. This wasn't just a local case. It quickly became one of the most high-profile investigations in British Columbia. The team worked closely with Burnaby RCMP, supported by BC RCMP's integrated teams and policing resources from across the Lower Mainland. They treated the case as a top priority, knowing the public was deeply shaken. Within days, IHIT began collecting surveillance footage from businesses, transit stations, and residential security systems. They also conducted extensive interviews. Over 1,300 people were spoken to in the first year alone. One of the most important tools in the investigation was DNA evidence. Forensic teams recovered genetic material from the scene and began analyzing it. In 2018, IHIT used advanced DNA phenotyping, a technique that predicts physical traits based on genetic markers. This helped narrow the suspect profile to a man of Middle Eastern descent. Investigators also began comparing the DNA sample to profiles in national databases. But since the suspect wasn't previously known to police, there was no immediate match. So they expanded their approach. They began collecting DNA samples from individuals who matched the general profile and had been in the area at the time. This process was slow, meticulous, and required legal approvals. Eventually, a match was found. The DNA linked back to Ibrahim Ali, a man who had arrived in Canada as a refugee from Syria just months before Marissa's disappearance. The timeline of the investigation began in July 2017 when Marissa was found in Central Park. That same day, the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, or IHIT, launched a full-scale investigation that would grow into one of the largest in British Columbia's history. From the fall of 2017 through the summer of 2018, investigators worked tirelessly. They conducted interviews, followed up on tips, and analyzed forensic evidence, including DNA. By July 2018, IHIT announced that they had received more than 200 public tips and had completed thousands of investigative tasks. The scale of their work was staggering. Then, on September 7, 2018, a major breakthrough came. Ibrahim Ali was arrested in connection with the case. Just a few days later, on September 10th, the RCMP held a press conference to publicly announce the arrest and the charges. At that press conference, police emphasized just how extensive the investigation had been. They had completed over 2,300 investigative tasks, concluded more than 1,300 interviews, and reviewed hundreds of tips. It was, without question, one of the most resource-intensive cases the region had ever seen. Ali was charged with first degree in connection with Marissa's case. He was taken into custody and held without bail. The RCMP stated that the incident appeared to be a random act and there was no known connection between Ali and Marissa. The arrest sparked a wave of public reaction. For many, it was a relief that someone had been charged, but the fact that Ali was a recent refugee led to political debates across Canada. Some media outlets focused on immigration policy, while others emphasized the importance of not generalizing or stigmatizing entire communities. Marissa's family released a statement thanking the police and asking for privacy. Their focus remained on justice and honoring their daughter's memory. When Ibrahim Ali was arrested in September 2018, many people in Burnaby thought the case would move quickly through the courts. But the reality was very different. The trial was scheduled, postponed, rescheduled, and postponed again, 5 times in total. Some of the delays were due to the procedural issues, others were tied to the pandemic, and still others came down to the sheer complexity of the case. Each time the trial was pushed back, Marissa's family had to relive the uncertainty. For them, every delay meant more waiting, more unanswered questions, and more emotional strain. By the time the trial finally began in April 2023, nearly 6 years had passed since Marissa's disappearance. For her family, it had been an agonizing wait, and for the community, it felt like justice had been on pause for far too long. The trial opened in the Supreme Court of British Columbia. On the first day, Ibrahim Ali entered a plea of not guilty. The courtroom was filled with reporters, legal teams, and members of the public who had followed the case closely for years. Because of the sensitive nature of the proceedings, certain details were placed under a publication ban. This meant that the media couldn't report on some aspects of the evidence until the trial had concluded. The goal was to ensure a fair process and protect the integrity of the case. The Crown presented evidence gathered over years of investigation, including DNA analysis that linked Ali to the scene. They also called witnesses who helped establish the timeline of events. The defense, meanwhile, challenged the reliability of the forensic evidence and raised questions about how the investigation had been conducted. The trial drew national attention. News outlets across Canada covered the proceedings, and every development was reported widely. For many, this case had become symbolic, not just of a tragic loss, but of broader conversations about safety, justice, and trust in the legal system. The repeated delays had already frustrated the public, and when the trial finally began, there was a sense of relief that the process was moving forward. Still, coverage was careful, often limited by the publication ban, which meant the public only got a glimpse of what was happening inside the courtroom. Throughout the trial, Marissa's family attended court sessions. They sat quietly, listening to testimony and arguments, carrying the weight of 6 years of grief. For them, this wasn't just a legal process. It was deeply personal. Their presence was a reminder that behind every headline and every legal argument was a family who had lost a daughter, a sister, a loved one. In June 2024, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned its verdict, guilty of first degree. The judge sentenced Ibrahim Ali to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. In Canadian law, this is the mandatory sentence for first-degree cases. The judge emphasized the seriousness of the crime and the devastating impact it had on Marissa's family and the community. For Marissa's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but not healing. They spoke about their ongoing grief and the loss of a daughter, sister, and friend. They thanked the community for standing by them through the long years of waiting. In Burnaby, the verdict was met with a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that justice had been served, but sadness that it had taken so long, and that a young life had been lost in such a senseless way. When news first broke in July 2017, Burnaby was shaken to its core. Central Park, once seen as a safe and welcoming space, suddenly carried a shadow. Parents who had once felt comfortable letting their kids walk to the store or play outside now thought twice. Joggers avoided the wooded trails at night. The sense of safety that had defined the community was disrupted, and it took years for people to feel at ease again. But alongside the fear, there was also unity. Neighbors came together to support Marissa's family. Vigils were held, candles lit, and flowers placed at the park. A memorial grew in the days after her passing, with stuffed animals, handwritten notes, and drawings left by classmates and strangers alike. As one local resident said at the time, it affects everybody. That sentiment captured the way this case rippled far beyond one family. It touched an entire city. For her family, Marissa is remembered not as a case, but as a daughter and a sister who loved art, music, and laughter. On anniversaries, they've spoken about how much they miss her, describing her as a gentle, creative soul who had so much life ahead of her. Her schoolmates and teachers also remembered her with tributes. Some described her as shy but kind, someone who left an impression with her warmth. In the years since, her name has been spoken at memorials, vigils, and community gatherings, ensuring she is never forgotten. The case also sparked national conversations. Some of those discussions centered on public safety, how communities can better protect young people, and how parents can talk to their children about awareness without instilling fear. Others focused on the justice system itself. The repeated trial delays frustrated many, raising questions about how long families should have to wait for closure. For some, the case became a symbol of the need for efficiency and transparency in the courts. There were also political debates, particularly around immigration and refugee policy, since Ibrahim had arrived in Canada as a refugee. While some voices tried to use the case to argue for stricter policies, others pushed back, emphasizing that one individual's actions should not define an entire community. Through it all, Marissa's family remained focused on their daughter, asking that the public remember her life rather than politicize her loss. Today, Central Park still stands as a place of reflection. For many, it is no longer just a park. It's a reminder of Marissa, of fragility of life, and the resilience of a community that came together in grief. Her story continues to be told, not only in Burnaby, but across Canada. It's a reminder that behind every headline is a real person, a real family, and a real community forever changed. For listeners, remembering Marissa means more than recounting the details of her case. It means honoring her life, her creativity, and the love her family continues to carry for her. So as we close this episode, let's hold on to that. Marissa Shen was more than a name in the news. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a young girl with dreams. Her story reminds us of the importance of compassion, of community, and of never forgetting the people at the heart of these cases. Don't forget to follow, like, and share. It helps more people discover these stories and keeps the conversation going. Thanks for listening to Crime Time 911. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your gut.